So we return everyone to the next stage, final stages now. We've got to get these balloons in. Just worth mentioning at this juncture, housekeeping. Clean water, everyone. You've rinsed your brushes. You've probably hopefully cleaned up the palette and so on. We've got a new venture now, the balloons, and that takes a pause just to do that bit of housekeeping. Is well worth mentioning. And in analysis, I just want to also state it's quite interesting, but realise that during the course of this painting so far, these are the three colours that we've used. In this demo, we've used the ultramarine, that cadmium yellow, and that alizarin red. Essentially, the three primaries of sorts. It could have been a brighter yellow, and it could have been more of a more cadmium red, but because of the time of day this evening, I've chosen this alizarin. So from those we derived that's happened somewhere in this painting. That's happened also, those mixes there, and that's quite important too, the violet combined by the alizarin and ultramarine that's made that. Well worth maintaining a swatch during the course of your works, your watercolour works, gaining that sort of knowledge of your palette and how to extend and expand, develop that. So worth mentioning. So we need to begin now the next stage. We've got here this balloon, and no fear if we may just want at this stage just to go back and do a little bit of pencil work if it helps. The anatomy of the hot air balloon, well, it's got these pleats. You see, I've just started to sort of map these. The light is obviously from the left here, and I'm just very gently just going over, just making sure I know its construction. This is all in shadow here. However, not only are there these the pleats of the balloon, it's sort of characteristic and quite interesting, but it's also got sort of bands of colour. Each balloon is different in design, and we're going to pick up on that. So let's make a start, and guess what? I'm going to start again where we really began. I'm going to start with a bit of ultramarine. Again, I'm using important to use a swatch. I think just very lightly, just begin the sort of outlines of shadow within the structure of the balloon. So this might be a good starting point. I'm going to go the shadow side here, just practicing these runs. You can see what I'm forming here. Okay, it's sort of just a way of getting started and giving one a confidence in the approach to the start of the first balloon. And this is the one that's going to have all the sorts of presence of detail, but it also help you sight yourself up for the other balloons which go back in space. So I'm just doing this very, very delicately, very gently, and very lightly too. I'm just sort of picking up on the shadow sides of these, as I said, these pleats. So that's a way of sort of starting to get a feel of that first balloon, its position. I could begin elsewhere also here in the background, very gently, very lightly, be in control. It's a mistake to go in too hard and too heavy. We'll get it dark as we perceive during the course of the next few minutes. So I'm just very carefully looking at and deciding on each of these balloons and their position relative to each other, and just beginning to sort of fathom where each one is. I've got the pre-drawing, some of that pre-drawing is there from the earlier stages. So I'm going on the shadow side there. Very good. Now this balloon has bands of colour. It has bands of colour which come about the circumference of the form. So I'm just starting to recognise those. So again, very gently, I'm using the blue to begin with, very gently. You may have a different sort of pattern to your subject and colours. We'll look at that in a moment, but this is like a sort of ghosting. It's a way of sort of just sorting out, finding your way around the structure and patterns of the balloon. And you can see how I've got this sort of undulating banding. I'm just finding my way with that very gently, and it's a colour, darker colour than the rest of the balloon. So I'm just using this little blue as a starting point, and I'm sensitive to its dark, where it's darker and then lighter as it comes around that circumference. So you need to watch out for that. It's all about observation at this stage, most definitely. And as you gain confidence, you'll reinstate and you'll emphasize and put more value, darker tones, which begin to really form the aspect of the balloon in its entirety. And the way optically this is going to work is that this leading balloon will lend itself then to the other in the composition. That will be your focal point, and our eye will go about the other balloon. So these won't need as much attention. They need some careful consideration, certainly, but you could argue that they won't need as much attention. I'm almost, look at the first indication of the sort of basket beneath this balloon here. And for that matter, I could perhaps just start to indicate here what's going on. There's a sort of this is a dimensional shape, the basket. I've got a side furthest away from the lighter source, the sun. I can just see the underside of this basket, and there's sort of inhabitants, those pilots and passengers in the balloon. I'm almost starting to form that very simply. But again, I'm just, what I call with this blue is ghosting, and I've got different sized brushes, as you will use to make sure of the finer, more controlled aspects of each of the details within the structure of the balloon that you're describing. So do begin now to put about the description of the balloon and its colours. So now we're nearing the full description, completion of our balloons in evening, dusk or dawn sky, and I'm going to start to put a bit of colour into these balloons. The balloons have got quite a few patches of colour. Principally, this one in the foreground has a sort of red design, and I'm going to start placing this glaze of a wash of red to suit. And you can see it's going over that initial blue, that what I call that ghosting, and will help with the drawing. And I'm using a cadmium red. That's a red we haven't used yet. We used the alizarin. This is the second red we're using, and a cadmium red, so it's distinct from the one used in the background. And you can see how I'm beginning to just strike this very carefully but boldly, and it begins to give a bit of sort of life to the balloon. It gives it its characteristic, its unique position in the sky amongst the others, and it changes colour at the top band there. We're going to use something else there in a moment. Let's just let that red begin to settle, and you do this a few times. You'll go over it a few times, and it's not to say that you won't come back in also with the blue again emphasize and darken where you think fit. This is progressive. Do it light to dark. Do it. Be patient. Do it gently. And look at it in context of the whole painting. You've got to see it in relation to the whole painting and how it sits in terms of its colour and its depth of tone. The top band's got this sort of violet. Now, about the paint palette, no problems. If you've got a secondary use of secondaries, you see my palette has. I'm being very strict here. I've only used, as you know, 3 or 4 colours during the course of this watercolour. We're starting to expand now. It's not a problem with that. If you want to go to some secondaries you have to suit your design in the balloon, that's not a problem. I've got a violet here, which hasn't been mixed from the alizarin and the ultramarine, but I'm going to use it for the top band of this balloon here. I just think it's going to be quite a nice striking colour to combine, and placing that in now. And I'll tone this down. I'll get it to fit carefully, and it's lightest, it's darkest, and it's going lighter as we come around the form. And progressively I'm going to work towards that goal. Just moving on, I might let that stage dry there. I've got here one of the other balloons, the second balloon, in sense of perspective and distance, is also quite red in nature. It's a different sort of design. It hasn't got the bands, so I'll start to do the same here. I start on the dark side, and I'll work across to the light, and respecting the under painting of those pleats. And again, it's just carefully does it. I'm just starting to find my connections across the whole of the painting. So here we are now, final stages. Just tentatively sort of putting some light glazes in areas requiring. You can see how much more colourful this has become. I've used a quite extensive use now across the palette, and you will do the same relating to your colour scheme, especially the balloons, and they've given the whole thing a sort of sense of life and colour. And remember, maintaining that strict sense of light coming across the left of the painting. So finishing off, and right at the end, something else we may choose to do is use a little bit of white paint, just a bit of white watercolour or gouache, just very gently. I've got a small brush here, and we might just do a bit of sort of highlighting in places. And it's a place where you may just go in and if there's been a sort of mistake, if you've got a little bit dark, then fair enough, just glaze over, but just a little bit. Don't. It's not painting with white. We're not mixing it in with any other colours. We're just using it just to put some emphasis, some little highlights in places, just to give a little reference in areas of the painting. And that really finishes our exercise of this week. And lastly, it's the reveal. Let's take this tape off, and hopefully we've got ourselves a nice sharp edge, which is quite nice and satisfying for the sense of presentation.
Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon? Would you like to glide in my beautiful balloon? We could float among the stars together, you and I. Oh, we can fly, yeah, we can fly up and away in my beautiful balloon. The world's a nicer place in my beautiful balloon. It wears a nicer face in my beautiful balloon. We can sing a song and sail along the silver